Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. Hope you're all well and safe wherever you are. Welcome to the NFTs It's Easier and Harder Than You Think session. I'm here with a couple of very special guests who will introduce themselves in a little while. My name's Anthony Day. I'm a partner in blockchain at IBM. I've been working with clients in blockchain space for about 5 years in a number of different settings, whether that be supply chain, provenance, and in this case, tokenization, or tokenization has been somewhat shortened or abridged to NFTs or NFTs, whichever you prefer to go to, but essentially it's the idea of tokenizing things. And we're going to spend a little bit of time today going through the technical components of that, the business considerations of that, some examples of good and bad, and obviously plenty of time for Q&A. So as we're going through this, please do feel free, jump in the chat, jump in the Q&A, wherever you want to write stuff, we'll pick it up. Feel free to write all sorts of obnoxious comments about our haircuts, our beards, anything you feel like. It's Thursday, it's sun's shining outside, we're all good at this. So let me know what you want to hear from any of the panelists or from myself as we go through. After that short intro, I'm going to ask Keir to please give his introduction, and then Sebastian, over to you.
Right. So I'm Keir Finlow-Bates. Since 2016, I've been a full-time blockchain researcher. And before that, I spent the previous 5 years kind of doing it as a hobby. And I'm based in Finland. And yeah, that's basically it.
Thanks, Keir. Sebastian, tell us about your experience in blockchain and what you bring to the table today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sebastian Becker. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Vienna-based company Riddle&Code. We call ourselves the blockchain interface company. So we don't limit ourselves to do, let's say, software blockchain projects, but we also do specific and dedicated blockchain hardware solutions. I'm in rainy Germany, in the middle of Germany today, and I'm in the blockchain space full-time since 2017. First, let's say, blockchain related startup discussions in 2012, but unfortunately I didn't buy them, which is still a big pain.
You big dirty no coiner. So thank you very much, gents, for the introduction. So this is going to be an abridged version of a bit of content, a podcast we put out a few weeks ago called The Roast of NFTs. If you haven't checked it out, it's on the Blockchain Won't Save the World podcast or on YouTube. So that's the long form of this. We also had more guests, much better diversity. Unfortunately, some of our other guests for time zone reasons couldn't make it to this show. So you're stuck with us. So please do go and check that out. Let's start with a technical 101 if we can, Keir. Let's talk people through what is the concept of NFT, what is the concept of tokenization, and what is required technically to create one.
Right. So NFTs are things that are created using a standard, and the most common standard is known as ERC 721. And basically that is a format that a program on a blockchain has to adhere to in order for it to be considered an NFT. Now, I'm already realizing that I'm kind of going off track here. So let's back up and not actually start talking about standards. Most of you probably have some kind of idea of what a cryptocurrency is, where you have a particular coin and you have a balance of it. And then you can buy more and your balance goes up, or you can sell some and then your balance goes down. Now, an NFT is very similar to a cryptocurrency, except that there's only one coin. And you can either own it or not. You can't split it up into fractions. So from a technical point of view, that's probably the simplest way of looking at it. However, there's a little bit extra tacked on to NFTs because you don't just have the coin or not, but on the blockchain, the data that represents that one single coin can also have extra data known as metadata. And that ERC 721 standard that I described gives you a format for that data, and typically it's a URL. So it's a pointer to a file, maybe an image file, maybe a text file, somewhere else. It could be on a website, it could be on a file server somewhere. And now, if I kind of back up even more from a technical point of view, if you think of a blockchain as a ledger, so like a spreadsheet, like an Excel sheet that's out there on the internet, and there are many, many copies because it's a distributed ledger, then an NFT is like a row in that ledger. And the row has a field in it that says it's owned by a particular person. And the ownership there means that the person whose name is in that, who owns this row, is the only one who can change it. They can decide to hand the ownership over to somebody else. And for an NFT, the row also has that metadata link that I mentioned and whatever other stuff you like. But unlike a cryptocurrency, it doesn't have a balance. It doesn't say that you own 10,000 of the NFT, you just own that single one. So hopefully I've kind of backed up from the technical to enough of an understanding that even somebody who doesn't know any programming can actually get some kind of sense of what's going on there. Does that make sense, Anthony?
Yeah, great start, Keir. Thank you. I mean, essentially, it's think of it as a token or as a digital representation of ownership of a thing, whether that thing be digital or physical. Perfect segue into the man who knows more about digital twins than anybody I know, at least. Sebastian, talk to us about the complexity or the where this gets interesting when we start thinking about NFTs for physical things while Keir starts downing a can of Four Loko.
Okay. Well, let me start with a rather philosophical statement. You know, blockchain is not here to be, you know, an end in itself. So we have to avoid, if we talk especially about industrial use of blockchain, to do it for, you know, la pour la reasons. We have to solve an issue, basically. So that's the question. And of course, the concept of a digital twin is older than the concept of blockchains. You know, we know it from the architectural world. We know it from, you know, prototyping cars, from the medical space, etc. And in the traditional sense, a digital twin was a representation of mostly sensor data and other properties that are representing the original physical asset. And then you could, you know, compute them or change them to do predictive maintenance, to find out whether, you know, changes to the machine will have the desired effects, etc., etc. But there was no need to prove that the underlying machine is exactly in that one warehouse or in the other warehouse. It was a concept of abstraction, but using, let's say, real world data. And now in the blockchain space, since Keir mentioned the ledger properties, the link between the digital twin and the physical underlying asset is becoming as, you know, close and as secure as possible, because it's not only about computing real world data, but it's really about proving that these data sets are exactly coming from that vehicle or that machine. And then you also change, you know, properties, or you add metadata to the digital twin. And you might even have, you know, shared ownership of such a digital twin, or at least shared access. And that's also, I think, the differentiation between NFTs as a broader concept. And if we talk about taxonomy of things, the issue is that the upcoming, you know, blockchain-based thought processes are, of course, also changing the traditional taxonomy or hierarchy of things. So I think it is fair to say that digital twins are an undercategory of NFTs. There are digital or digital-only NFTs, which are typically the asset. Keir mentioned the link, of course, the metadata link that links, you know, the entry in the ledger to the repository of the digital files. And digital twins are representations of physical assets that are, of course, somewhere in the physical world, and they might be moving. And it's not only about modeling these, but really about steering these, about adding properties, accrue value, or capabilities. And the best picture I think I can give is, you know, the autonomous car. We all know that once we enter into these vehicles, that our lives will depend on, you know, functioning systems and backends, and the backend somehow has to tell the car, hey, Anthony is coming closer to your door. We checked his driver's license and his credit card and whatever. Please, you can open the door now. And then once Anthony is in the seat might send back a signal, you know, I'm feeling Anthony, so you can ignite the engine now. And then the car also has to send, let's say, drive worthiness and drive readiness status to the backend, and then the backend is igniting the engine. So if we think about all this complexity, I think it becomes understandable that digital twins will not only be used for modeling purposes, but about handling real life assets. And then to make things even more complex, you can also, tokenize these assets and edit, in this case, not NFTs, but fungible tokens to represent, let's say, identical shares of ownership of a vehicle. And that's then the interplay between NFTs and fungible tokens. And last sentence, I think the big difference, or one of the big issues in the blockchain space is the so-called Oracle problem. Yeah. The blockchain is cryptographically secured once data is in there, and if you manipulate it properly, it will be tamper-proof. But how do we know if a certain data set is true? Think of the American presidential election. It's not so easy sometimes to even state simple facts. And of course, if we go back in history, when the Catholic Church was, selling these indulgence letters, of course, this was also a promise, but Oracle problem, the things that have been promised were most likely not true, at least not in all the cases. And that's what we are trying to solve also as a company, as Riddle&Code, that we built in crypto chip modules into machines so that we can be sure that the data, the sensor data that we read out and take as the foundation for computing based on digital twins are indeed accurate and tamper-proof. And the sad conclusion of all of that is, if we talk about machine-to-machine interaction, we can basically almost, design a world where interfering with these data is impossible. As long as there's human intervention, there's still room for error, of course, also for corruptive behavior, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you for that one, Sebastian. A quiet reminder that you are on Ireland Blockchain Week, and shots fired at the Catholic Church is probably not to be encouraged, but thank you for a wide spectrum of interesting analogies. And I think, the first one I picked up on there is the difference between NFT and FT, non-fungible tokens and fungible tokens. So let's use the Beeple example, because that's one that got a lot of headlines. $68 million paid for an NFT that was a digital representation of a piece of Banksy art that was burned. There is only one NFT that represents that image, the ownership of that image. However, that particular NFT was bought by a fund or by a kind of a crowd fund, which had fungible tokens, shares of ownership in that particular one NFT that's owned by, I forget the name of the company now, I'll try and dig it out if I can. But essentially, you've got a non-fungible token that has a series of fungible tokens issued against it in terms of shares of ownership. So an immediate relevant example, artwork is one of those use cases that I think has got quite a lot of interest, quite a lot of focus in recent times, because it's actually quite easy to imagine. It's quite, from a digital perspective, digital art is very, very, very democratized, very, very easy to launch, to mint. It is digitally native already. Physical art in the real world, slightly different. What you're saying is that you are manifesting the ownership of that particular piece of digital art, or that particular piece of physical art, as DLA Piper did with their Toko platform on Hedera Hashgraph. You're digitizing the ownership rights to a physical thing. And so the challenges around the digital twin come when, is that physical thing there anymore? Right? I had the ownership right, but if the painting is stolen, do I still have the ownership rights in something that I can then enjoy? And that you get into a few different challenges down that end of the spectrum. But we're not going to go there just yet until we get into so what does this mean for enterprise? What I'd like to do is take us through a few examples of good and then bad and then possibly even worse around how NFTs are being used at the moment. So Keir, let's bring it back to you. We had a couple of examples on the roast where there were a couple of use cases around NFTs that you thought were particularly valuable to the world and some that were less so. Let's have your ones that you thought were most valuable, please.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this more since the roast. Now, with all respect to Sebastian, and I'm very glad that he's working on the digital twin problem, linking NFTs to the real world. But I think that in the sort of short to medium term, there's still plenty that can be done in purely the digital world. And
fully agree.
There, I think the idea of an NFT going just beyond ownership to actually giving you some kind of digital right is something that I find very interesting. So at the moment, when you see these NFTs being used to represent a piece of art or something like that, they're just focusing on the fact that an NFT is owned by an entity, and that ownership means they can either hold on to it or they can sell or transfer it onto somebody else. And we're still kind of working through what the legal backup requirements are in order to ensure that that ownership actually means something. But what you can do is you can make NFTs that when you go to a different platform or system, give you some right that you wouldn't have if you don't hold that token. And a very simple example would be the gaming industry. So if you look at things like Fortnite or World of Warcraft or stuff like that, you have assets in those games, and they actually have value. People pay money to exchange them. People build up accounts on these games and then sell them on. So they actually have real world value. And I think that for up and coming games companies, the idea of representing the assets in their games as non-fungible tokens, so a magic sword or a horse or something like that in a game, is a very interesting one, because it gives them something that the incumbent games companies don't offer at the moment and actually don't want to offer. When you have V-Bucks in Fortnite and you buy the skins in the game, you can't trade them with anybody else without permission from the game company. And that's not something you see in the real world. If I go and buy a Spider-Man costume and then I'm fed up of it, I can wash it and then sell it in a secondhand store. And I think it's something that people miss in the in the digital world, is the fact that they can't sell on their secondhand books or their CDs anymore because a central authority controls that you own them. So this is where I see NFTs as offering something that I think people want when they think about it, which is that it represents your ownership of a particular item. And it's easiest to do at the moment for a digital thing like a video or a sound file or something like that, that you can then actually sell it on a market separate from a central platform. And this can carry across to all sorts of things. You can have, if companies start virtualizing themselves more, then you could end up with things like an NFT token for a CEO, whereby being the person holding that token, you have access to the things that only the CEO is supposed to have. And that kind of stuff, I think, is easier to get cracking on. As I said, I'm glad that people like Sebastian are working on relating them to the real world, but I think the low-hanging fruit is this digital side. So, and now I'll give someone else a chance to speak.
There's an interesting analogy on that one, Keir, because the concept of giving people tokens for access is not unique to blockchain, right? If you look at entry and access management, or if you look at sort of general security as a domain, the idea of giving one-time passcodes or tokens for access to systems, it's directly analogous here. But what we're saying is that access, that token here, has a little bit more sitting behind it in terms of tradability, in terms of provenance, in terms of the rights that sit behind it. So yes. I think let's not say that this is the first time that tokens ever exist as a concept, or tokens as rights, but the mechanism for buying, trading, owning, and holding is different here.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing you need to, you're absolutely right that tokens, in order to get access to things, exist already. The problem you have at the moment with conventional tokens is they are centralized. So if an admin decides they want to censor you, you no longer have access to the things that your token gives you access to. They can cancel the token. With a blockchain, you have a situation where that token actually genuinely belongs to you and nobody else can come along and take it off you. Well, unless they actually approach you in the physical world and threaten you. But in a digital sense, there's no chance of a rogue admin or a company that decides they dislike you stepping up and removing your access rights. And anybody who's been shadow banned on Instagram or things like that will actually sense that, yes, censorship is a problem. Well, it's not a problem until it happens to you, and then it's a problem. And
what were you shadow banned for on Instagram, Keir?
I don't use Instagram, but my wife was at one point. So, yeah, it kind of, this censorship resistance is a very important feature of blockchain. That this is what means that you actually genuinely own the stuff, and when tied to these access tokens, this means that once you have obtained a right that, let's say, you paid for, nobody can forcefully take it off you. And I think that's important in today's world when you see what's going on.
Yeah, I think so. And extending the gaming kind of domain for a moment. I think most of the gaming platforms that you're seeing, whether it's sports games, fighting games, adventure games, are centralized. As you said, they have their native currencies where people all around the world can pay the gaming company to accelerate their progress in the game or whatever it might be. I think the space of decentralized gaming companies or dApps that have gaming components to them, where you have that decentralized code-based model of how people interact with the game, is probably on the come up. I don't know if you've seen or you've kind of identified any particular decentralized games that are out there, but I saw this morning Animoca is launching its platform around. There's a couple of different models. I think one's for racing, one's more of an adventure game, but in that concept, they're using Hedera Hashcraft to issue the tokens, but then they're offering to buy back particular items from the game for cryptocurrency in return. So there's a trade-in directly with the game manufacturer before you've even thought about the trade with peers concept too, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, it does open up a lot of stuff, and and one thing you have to remember is that when we talk about games, it may sound like it's trivial, but the gaming industry is actually bigger than the movie industry. It's sort of the biggest entertainment field out there. So we're not talking about pennies here. We're talking about a significant industry that could see a real, almost philosophical change in the way that they approach how these games work. And I think that could be quite meaningful.
Very good. Sebastian, you've been quiet for a while and you've been umming and ahhing as to whether you think the gaming industry is going to become bigger than the vehicle industry in due course. Tell me some of your favorite examples of NFTs that you think have got real world value.
Yeah, let me first respond to some of the thoughts that Keir was mentioning. So there's also a correlation, I think, between the digital twins of physical assets and the gaming industry. If you think of autonomous cars and all those sensors out there, the concept that we are a bit pursuing is that of NPCs, non-player characters that we know from games as well. So programs that are influencing the gameplay, but that can't be influenced by the gamer itself. And that's how we sometimes model autonomous cars or sensors, because they are becoming trusted data sources if you turn them into digital twins based on crypto chips. But they are still basically conveying, information from the real world, like temperature, etc. So, and this will have an influence, especially if we think about circular economy models, recycling regimes, anti-air pollution or anti-CO2 emission regimes, basically, and that is also quite important to understand. So it's not about digital twins versus NFTs. I fully agree that there are more possibilities for digital native assets to become let's say a new and additional domain also of value creation and creativity. But still, we will move in the physical world, so combining the two will be utterly essential. And then a second analogy, gaming is, yes, a very big entertainment industry. Then there's also the adult entertainment industry. And I think if I think of how to use, NFTs also in the broader media sense of things, collecting societies and other traditional forms of not only generating, but now my English module is not working properly, about paying out basically the royalties. That's of course an obvious blockchain use case, but the big differentiator here, I think, is programmability. And if we think about the dissemination of content, it will not only be the publishing house and the author or the film producer, and then some journalists and then some YouTubers that are participating in the value chain of content distribution, but also those opinion leaders. And if you only have 20 friends and you recommend a movie 20 times successfully, and if you forward that link to that special NFT, which might still be a copy of that link, but here it's more about the programmability. The film studio will realize that you forwarded that link, the 20 friends opened and purchased a movie or streamed it because of you, and then you will get a kickback. And then we can prevent situations like that one very famous German porn actress of 20 years ago. She made a total rights buyout for 20,000 euros, did only 3 movies, and became one of the most famous adult actresses. And she's everywhere, and she did not benefit apart from the celebrity aspect. And that's, of course, it's a situation that blockchain-based systems where the ledger, the security, the efficiency of following suit will really take over. But coming back, sorry for that, excursion. To your question.
Sidebar. We've gone from the Catholic Church to the German porn industry. Where are we going next, Sebastian?
Yeah, it was about good and bad use of NFTs. So I think there are many examples of, not so creative NFTs during the roast. I was citing, a Baltic airline that was issuing an NFT, like more a collectibles thing. When you board the aircraft, then you can get digital pictures of famous cities of that specific country. Of course, that's not very interesting. But let's say the understanding of that multi-dimensional thing that NFTs and digital twins are is not very, deep yet. So I think we will certainly see very interesting use cases, both in the digital and in the physical space. I don't want to, put something in the shop window right now. But I think if you think of machinery industry, of the automotive industry, of the energy industry, even, we know that we have to reach the sustainable development goals. We know that we need to incentivize behavior that is desired by us as, enlightened societies. And that's where tokenization and the use of digital twins and NFTs in the boring industrial sense will, of course, it will have to have a massive footprint and consequences, positive ones, hopefully.
Yeah, I think the mundane usefulness use cases around tokens, whether that be relating to warranties or proofs of ownership, or even a digital bill of lading or a chain of custody component around a particular trading use case, I think are ones that will capture the imagination less. As I said, I think the arts and digital arts concept has captured the imagination because it's something that everybody can relate to an extent. I've got a question in the Q&A about art that I'm going to get to in a minute, but one of my realizations around why I think NFTs is interesting and also tragic at the moment is the concept of collectibles, whether that be in a game or wherever, is driven by scarcity. Right, is that there are a limited number, and for the most part, when you're relating to baseball cards or physical collectibles, there's some sort of requirement that the collectibles company, whether that be Panini or whether that be Pogs or whatever it is, are going to guarantee that only a certain number of those things have been licensed and issued. Whether that's correct or not is neither here nor there. But for collectibles, there is something around scarcity, and in the digital world, you can verify that has happened because the number of things that have issued. You can look at the data from a platform once those things have been minted. In open platforms, you can genuinely see that scarcity is valid, and so you've got some support there. On the flip side, with blockchain and tokenization, you've got a technology that's designed for democratization. So actually, what it allows is the, relatively speaking, low cost of participation, whether that be for minting tokens, for issuing NFTs, getting onto platforms, the low cost of entry, in the same way as you have a low cost of entry for digital photography into issuance of digital assets. So that's super interesting. But what I think the misconception is that every NFT is valuable. So the NFT industry at the very beginning, every NFT that was ever launched, whether it was a meme, whether it was a piece of artwork featuring Jay and Silent Bob, it would always go for $500,000 because that's what it's going to go for. And so, the gold rush began as everybody and their dog began issuing NFTs of pictures of everything that you can imagine. And so what you've seen there is a huge amount of participation in terms of creativity, in terms of digital artists being able to issue content for people to be able to buy and trade that content, collect it, put it into a place where they can hopefully look at it and do something with it in future. With digital content, with digital assets, I guess it's harder because your collection is on a phone, in a wallet. It's not that you can take out a book and look them through. You can't necessarily put it up on a wall for people to view. You've just got this archive of stuff that you've bought in the hope that it's going to appreciate. So I think there's a tension, and Brendan Cooper from Panini, who was on the roast, talked about this a lot. The scarcity and the persistence of those things are really important, and blockchain is helpful for that. But the democratization element means that you're just going to get, in the same way we have a proliferation of shitcoins, you're going to have a proliferation of NFTs that are of limited value. And maybe that's going to lead to disappointment. But I think it's important for people to look at this space to appreciate the drivers or the macro factors behind it. If we can generate scarcity, if we can generate interest, and we can digitally validate that that's the case, you can create content that's valuable, that's scarce, that's tradable, assuming that there's a market for it. At the same end of the spectrum, the cost of participation is relatively low, so anybody can issue NFT of anything, picture of their dog, picture of their face, whatever it might be.
And I think that's the difference between, let's say, the industrial use of NFTs or digital twins and the collectible space. You know, take collecting stamps. You know, it has been a huge hobby for decades, and still scarcity is there. But the interest in stamps has been plummeting for 15, 20 years now, and most likely it will not come back. So we have to pay attention if we talk about rare NFTs or scarcity, that we're not just hunting behind the next wave of bullshit fashion that comes around the corner. And the last decade with YouTube personalities dominating basically the media landscape and the value of truth becoming a very relative value, we really have to pay attention that not the bulk of, let's say, NFT activities goes in the wrong direction.
Deep words. I appreciate that, Sebastian. Again, it's kind of a call out saying, look, we're all for this. We value the technology. Let's use it for its appropriate means.
And for me, the basic or the most important concept still is programmability, because I think that's what differentiates traditional collectibles or items of scarcity with, let's say, blockchain as a security layer behind it, as also a notary layer or ledger. And then if you talk about security and efficiency, but that's also something for the creative world. You have to think about how you design not only the usability of things, but also the specific use case. Remember, we did a few years ago that project for a French luxury goods company where we built a crypto chip into an analog, watch, which was let's say, a masterpiece of fine engineering, I think, in the end. But what's the value? If you have a crypto chip in a watch, you can prove the provenance. You can really say this is a whatever watch coming from that specific watchmaker. But if you have a thief that is capable of his job and the watch goes off your wrist, do you want him to be then the owner because he owns the crypto chip and he could tap into the digital twin? No, you don't want that. So you need a second thing that must be part of a real handover. In this case, we created a paper certificate or a plastic certificate, and then you need to design either complicated or quite nice usability processes that define certain transactions. And if you think of digital NFTs, part of, I think, the artistic, the future of the artistic world will also be, how do we hand over NFTs? Do we just hand over a wallet address on any nifty marketplace? Yeah. Or will we, for example, use a nicely designed with a nice form factor, crypto chip where we upload the NFT to, and then it really sits on a chip in a nicely designed physical piece, and then you could hand it over as part of a Sotheby's auction, which might make a lot more sense than just hand over a digital key that might get lost. So the physical and the digital world, they will be intertwined in the future a lot more than in the past, and of course this will have lots of possibilities, but also lots of consequences.
We're starting to transition into one of Keir's most recent videos, is what happens to your NFTs or what happens to your crypto when you die, which is not the direction I want to take this, but it's definitely a video that's worth checking out. If you haven't seen Keir's LinkedIn or his YouTube channel, please go do check that out, because the video on what happens to your crypto when you die is definitely one that's worth watching philosophically, if not from an educational perspective. I'm going to take a few Q&As now because they're starting to rack up. So we've got Shalini, Kraken, Dan, and Bruno have all chipped in, and these are all that they know their audience. They've definitely picked your guys' special topics. So I'm going to start with Bruno on this one. What about copyrights and or IP for NFTs? So Keir, let you come in on this one as our expert in all things patents and IP. What do you think about the application for NFTs specifically relating to IP?
Oh, no, the question has disappeared. Okay, it's been answered apparently. So the thing about IP is that it is protected in law. And when you look at things like copyright or patents or trademarks, you go to court when you're looking for compensation if your patent has been infringed or if someone's ripped off your book or stuff like that. And NFTs are not going to be able to automate court cases. What they could be used as is as evidence of you being the owner of that particular piece of IP. So you could represent a patent as an NFT, and if the patent office recognizes that, now you have decentralized ownership of a patent. So at the moment, if you own a patent at the USPTO, for example, they have a database which says these are the assignees for these patents. IBM owns this one and Keir Finlow-Bates owns that one. But then you have to think about the use case. If instead of the USPTO keeping that database for me, they give me an NFT to represent my patent, well, that's great. Now I can trade it in a decentralized manner. And if Sebastian wants to buy it off me, we can strike a personal deal. He gives me a suitcase full of euros and I give him my NFT. But the thing is that I don't think Sebastian and I would be interested in actually conducting the trade like that. We're going to want lawyers and we're going to want the USPTO to know that the ownership has changed. So when it comes to using NFTs to represent intellectual property, given that ultimately you have to go back to a central authority, the court of the jurisdiction that recognizes your right and then allows you to sue for damages, I don't see the decentralized trading of these IP assets as being an amazing game, unless you want to keep the fact that you've traded your patent secret. But then you can do that through contracts conventionally anyway. Have an NDA that says I've sold the patent on to Sebastian, but I'm not allowed to tell anybody.
I think it gets interesting. Maybe so. I think that there's a few levels to this one. The first one is: do you want digitization of the process? Right? Do you want to be able to have a standardized, internationally recognized approach to trading that involves less lawyers? If we can digitize it, would that make it easier, more seamless? Would it increase liquidity? Not sure, I think, is the answer to that one, but I think that's probably level one. Level two, I mean, you talked about the USPO. One of the main values of blockchain is being able to create standardized platforms that work across borders. So are you seeing, or could we see value in the trading of IP assets from country to country, citizen to citizen, outside of country borders, where you might see payment mechanisms in crypto as opposed to US dollars or through credit cards, for example? I don't necessarily know if there's value there.
I think there's a couple of things there. Firstly, the USPTO and the American government is not going to like decentralized trading of patents because they have sanction lists. So if I own a USPTO patent and I sell it to North Korea or Iran, they're not going to be very happy about that. So there's your first problem. They're not going to want to give up central control.
Or they're not going to want to allow it without appropriate KYC.
Yeah. And then the second thing is this automation of processes. Well, whenever I've gone and looked at certain long-standing institutions and their processes, and for example, the USPTO has been around since pretty much the American Revolution almost. Their processes were built up over a long, long time, and they capture a lot of hidden knowledge. They're also in some ways a bit outdated, and you just have to go and look at the USPTO website when you start browsing around in their patent database. The website looks like something from 10 years ago. And I think there's this mistake that is often made that, well, if we just use a leading edge technology like blockchain, we can pull everybody else up into the present decade out of the previous one. It doesn't magically work that way. People are very resistant to process change because they're familiar with it. And also, if you have lots of different jurisdictions with their own government bodies, with their own processes, they are very possessive of their territory. So the French Patent Office is not going to want to give up their processes and procedures and adopt something that has been put forward by the United States, for example, and vice versa. Not to single out the French there. These are political issues rather than technical ones. And this is the problem that programmers and engineers often face, is they go, well, we can do this technically, that's not a problem. It's not about coding up a better database or a better blockchain system. It's about getting everybody on board. And that is 100 times harder than actually implementing the solution at the end. So I'm skeptical at how good blockchain is as a global force for driving change. I think it's nowhere near what some people believe it will be.
Interesting. And I think it's the difference between the challenge in implementation versus the digital capability benefits when you get there. Another big swig of Four Loko, and we'll go to another question. Sebastian, I'll pass this one to you. This one's from Shalini. Shout out to Shalini. Good idea for governments to put the digital copies of art from national museums on NFTs. Is it possible that that might increase the use of NFTs if we saw governments issuing digital copies of national art?
I think, if we want to make sense out of the tons of possibilities that lie ahead of us, it always makes sense to differentiate between the infrastructure level and the business or strategic level. Yes, we have the capability to issue NFTs now, and of course, there's no difference between a private collector or people issuing an NFT and a national museum doing so. But what do we want to achieve? Do we want to increase the collection of funds to preserve artworks, etc.? I think from a strategic and business level or point of view, the concept, for example, of staking is very interesting here. Not only in the arts context, but also if we think about industrial usage. As enlightened human beings, which are the concepts that we want to support? Is this limited to Bayern Munich as my personal football club, or do I want to support causes that are rather in the political or ecological domain? And the good thing about programmable processes is that I can stake certain things. I could support by staking coins. That means basically putting coins behind an idea. I could support the restoration of pieces of artwork that might not have found a sponsor yet, because typically restoration is paid by big institutions, but not necessarily by a group of 10 museum goers that so far have not been known to the museum because they didn't have a yearly membership or something comparable. And that's also true for all kinds of ecological use cases. If there's a patent about a more efficient combustion engine or EV battery, why shouldn't I be able to support it as a normal citizen? Why is the only place where I can stake is basically if I go into a casino and bet on a field on the roulette table? So driving innovation and accelerating the emergence or adoption of good things, that's something we should try to achieve by adopting blockchain technology.
That's very interesting, actually, Sebastian. I hadn't thought about that. So you're taking an NFT and instead of using it for its ownership properties, you're proposing using it for the identity of, say, the art piece, so that you now have a painting in the Louvre and you have an NFT that represents that painting. And if I want to donate to that painting, the way I might want to donate to a charity, I can actually put coins to that NFT address.
Let's say the Louvre could, ask for donations, and then they say, with the next 5 million that are coming in, we can either do A, B, C, or D. And if this means we take nice photos of Mona Lisa, or we shoot the next Illuminati movie, or we replace the Mona Lisa by something out of the bunker, that could then be staked. And there are many causes like giving pieces of stolen artwork back to Africa, or to the art that was stolen by the Germans in the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
There are still many causes that are supported by a large amount of people, but they have no way to access these processes so far.
Mm-hmm.
So democratization means also that we automate processes and we can put them on display, and then people can, basically it's a mix of voting, financial support, and efficiency games based on gaming theory.
Well, that's neat. I do think this shift from who owns it with the NFT to it feels to me like it's more in the identity space there. It's like you're voting for a candidate rather than...
Exactly. That's what I meant by multi-dimensional aspects of all of this. If we just limit it to collectibles or to industrial digital twins of combustion engines, then we don't see the point. And that's why there's still a big problem of adopting a well thought through blockchain-based technology innovation by big corporates, because you might have an innovation team here, but you still have the same 7 or 8 board members that might have understood one principle of blockchain, like they might have looked at the coin space, or they might have looked at security, but it's the mix of things that make it so interesting.
Well, I think here you've gone one step further than the Digital Autonomous Organization, or DAO, and come up with the Digital Autonomous Art Piece.
Love that. Love that. We're innovating live on channel, guys. This is brilliant.
As I said, the big challenge is to differentiate between what are we able to do on the technical level because of the maturity or increased maturity of the underlying infrastructure. And that has, all these dimensions, energy consumption of certain blockchains, etc. But then how do we make sense out of it? How do we design the processes? What do we want as a society or as a corporation or as an individual? We can't blame people for seeing a market for his work and collecting those, 69 million. But for sure, there's not enough, place in the market for 69 peoples to sell artworks for 69 million. So that's just how it is. So scarcity, you cannot not necessarily always design scarcity. Scarcity also means timing, and sometimes the timing is gone.
All right, guys, we're going to come back to the Q&A because we've actually got some pretty juicy questions in here, and I want to make sure we get a chance to answer some of these. Kraken, shout out to Kraken, thank you for your question. Now, is it best use of NFTs to authenticate a physical commodity? Now, I'm going to take a first stab at this one because there's an IBM specific example to this one, but Sebastian, I suspect there's probably a follow-on in relation to the digital twin components here, but an example of how we could do this, or how it is actually being done today for real, is a project IBM did with Norilsk Nickel around palladium. And so what they were looking to do is to tokenize a certain volume of their commodity. So they have a fairly large share of the palladium market. And what they were looking to do is a few different things. Firstly, to increase liquidity, so increase access and capital flow relating to that palladium, increase the size of the market, and be able to get access to more buyers. Secondly, the physical commodity itself was often traded through physical movements, right? So without a process of authentication and verification set behind it, you would actually move the physical goods from place to place while trading it, which is relatively inefficient. And I guess the third fringe benefit would then be reducing your carbon footprint relating to that particular commodity. So in this case, what they've done is they've issued tokens relating to a particular bar or particular bullion of palladium. That is that the existence of that token, the existence of that palladium is then verified, is given a unique signature in the real world on that particular bar, and is then stored in the equivalent of a bonded warehouse. So it is kept under lock and key. It is verified by an external third party, and that right or that token can then be traded by institutional buyers or by producers, those manufacturing organizations who want to use palladium in their production process, and eventually potentially retail investors as well. Now that's not quite where they've got to in terms of their approach, but the main two buyers in that case are manufacturers, producers, and then institutional investors who want to use palladium as an investment vehicle, as a hedge, whatever it might be. So in that model, the digital twin is important. There's a lot more physical verification, certifications, and attestations. The trust comes from the certification body and the physical security rather than the digital security as such. But the trading digitally is a way of enabling greater participation, lower cost, and more efficiency. Now, Sebastian, I don't know if you've seen other models specifically relating to commodities, but that's one model that I've seen and that is operational today.
Yeah, let me answer it by not talking too much about models, but about dimensions. One is, yes, the provenance of minerals. You know, we were asked by the automotive industry, all that cobalt that is typically mined in you know, what used to be the Congo, including child labor, etc. How can we prove the provenance of cobalt? But cobalt comes in minerals, and they are put in sacks, basically, and then somehow put on, you know, trucks and then shipped to the next harbor, which might be, you know, a few hundred, if not 1,000 miles away, dirt roads, etc. So yes, you can create something like a, you know, I don't know, a lock procedure for a sack, but you can still tear it apart. You know, who is really controlling on the ground that not the neighboring mine that uses child labor is inserting their minerals before the whole the stuff is packaged. So that's what I meant before. Machine-to-machine interaction is easy to monitor, and basically you can rule out the malicious behavior there. But as long as you still have 20 humans who are packing, shipping, offloading things, you know, it's not easy. But that's just one dimension. The second dimension is leveraging commodities, and of course you had trading of futures of, I don't know, copper, iron, or gold, and pork halves, pork bellies. But if you really tokenize some commodities, and you can also prove that their existence and that they are not multipled or reduced or whatever, then you can also leverage it financially. And you know, we've just launched kilowatt-hour tokens in a big energy tokenization project in Austria with Austria's largest electricity company. And that's basically the future. Once you produce kilowatt-hour tokens, and you basically tokenize energy production, then you can also leverage it financially. So a whole added layer of, let's say, financial value creation will be added to our economies, and it's quite interesting.
Kilowatts as collateral. Very good. Thank you for that one, Sebastian. I'm going to come to Keir on this next one because this relates to all things nefarious behavior.
Let me add one. Let me add a very last thing, because we mentioned the Mona Lisa. Don't forget, you know, other technologies are also advancing. So even today, you can 3D print an exact copy of the Mona Lisa. You know, after analyzing it, there are printing companies out there that can reproduce the exact same material composition of oil paintings that are centuries old. So the whole concept of digital twins and scarcity is also, to a certain extent, overtaken in some domains by technical progress.
Very interesting, albeit there is still only one original, even if there are many copies. Right, Max has come in with a question saying, how to protect NFTs against hacks? Because the security depends on the smart contracts in the current marketplaces. And this is an interesting one, particularly, and Brendan likes to talk about persistence, and particularly the persistence of the platforms on which NFTs are issued, right? And a big part of what blockchain platforms, particularly public blockchains, are designed for is to exist in perpetuity, and that they're very hard to take down, that anything, you know, in terms of data or information that's issued to that platform will always exist on the ledger because there will always be nodes supporting it. But some NFT platforms out there, as Brendan points to, don't quite have the same persistence capabilities, or the platforms that they're minting on are not necessarily as guaranteed to be perpetual as we might think they are. Keir, your thoughts on NFT hacks and security, please?
Yeah, so I mean, that's actually a pretty general question. We need to ask, how can we protect against hacks? Because that includes an awful lot of different things that can go wrong. So firstly, with your persistence question, yeah, this is why putting your token on Ethereum is generally has more cachet than putting it on Keir's random copy of Ethereum that he's running on his server at home, because I could turn my computer off and then it's gone. So there's a sort of brand issue here, and we've seen a number of Ethereum clones spring up in various popular platforms. When I dig into them, they don't have quite the decentralization that Ethereum does. But of course, the flip side is Ethereum is very expensive, so people don't want to pay, if they think there's a cheaper option they think is just as popular, they'll move there. So there is that kind of buyer beware thing if you go and buy NFTs from some other platform. As for the security of the NFTs, well, the evidence from blockchains is still that the blockchains themselves just churn away and are amazingly secure. It's very hard for people to mess them up. In their core, the programs or the smart contracts that run on them, on the other hand, is a completely different issue because they need to be coded up correctly and bug-free in order to function. And anybody who's done any coding knows that as soon as you write 10 lines of code, you've introduced a bug. And we've seen lots of disasters there. So that there's that kind of thing that we can't really overcome. I wouldn't want to stake any kind of significant value on any particular contract not being hackable at some point in the future. Then there's the interface problem, which is that even if your blockchain's running great and your smart code contract code is running brilliantly, we have to interact with the blockchain, and this is typically done with a website. And that means that you need to trust that website, and you need to trust that that website is doing the right thing. This actually is one of the things about NFTs that I don't like, that I wanted to raise, which is these, I think of them like the eBays of NFTs for art. I'm not going to mention them by name, but if you've looked at buying or selling NFTs for art, you'll have come across at least one of the 3 top ones. And these websites don't check the contracts. And so in fact, they just flash up a disclaimer saying, we haven't checked it. It's up to you to go and check the code. Now, of course, for 99% of people out there, being told you need to go to Etherscan and dig up the bytecode and then determine whether or not it was actually a genuinely compiled ERC721 token is going to be beyond their capacity. And I don't find it particularly easy, to be honest. So you're putting trust in the interfaces. The same with exchanges in the early part of the previous decade. People put their trust in them. It turned out that they couldn't be trusted, and the blockchains were fine, but these exchange interfaces were not. And I think we're seeing the same in NFT token interfaces.
Sebastian,
so,
are you looking to come in on this one, or we've got 3 minutes for another question?
Yeah, just a very quick answer. It's the same with exchanges. They have to ramp up the technology game. New technology is available, including technology by Riddle&Code to do proper key management and custody, and all these nifty marketplaces will have to live up to that. Otherwise, they will be regulated after we've seen a few decent hacks.
Got you. Thank you for that, Sebastian. I'll ask the last question. This is from Dan. Shout out to you, Dan. Thank you for bringing this one through. And it's a contemporary one. It's an interesting one. Maybe someday an air company will sell tickets in the form of NFTs. Wouldn't it be great to be able to sell the right to travel uncensored by air companies? And I guess in light of the recent Ryanair issue over Belarus, I mean, I guess that wasn't less related to the right to travel, and rather than less likely the rights to be diverted mid-flight. But is this an area that you think we need NFTs? Is the right to travel under threat?
Well, I think there's a problem again with airlines, that there are regulations, and you can't get on an airplane unless they know who you are and that you're not on some kind of watch list. So the problem with having airplane tickets that you can anonymously trade outside of the ticketing industry means again that I go and book a ticket and then I sell it to somebody who gets on the plane with some explosives in their shoes or something. So I can't see what the benefit here is from the blockchain that gives you ownership perspective. There may be benefits from an automation point of view, in that you have a unique ticket per seat, because a seat is a unique entity. So you can represent a seat on an airplane as an NFT, and then you pass it from passenger to passenger as they go on. So maybe there's some gains from automation, but there's certainly no gains that I can see from ownership. In fact, quite the opposite.
Another level down on that one, I guess, relating to aviation, is we've seen tokenization of the physical asset itself. So the ability to tokenize the parts on a particular aircraft to verify that, particularly during a trade or transition of an aircraft from one airline to another, you're seeing that there is provenance relating to the history, the authenticity, and the number of hours flown on particular life limited parts. That's one that back in my days at Deloitte, we spent a lot of time working on with the industry, and I think it's particularly interesting, the tokenization of components or materials, for example. We've got 1 minute to go, so I'm conscious I want to give you guys a good chance to let people find out how can they find out more about the work you're doing, and connect with you guys. Sebastian, how can people find more out about Riddle&Code and what you guys are up to right now?
It's relatively easy. Go to our website, go to LinkedIn. Of course, we have a nice series of blogs on Medium, and we do interesting stuff across the fintech sector, mobility sector, the supply chain and IoT sector, as well as automotive. Focusing on all, let's say, backend systems and highly secure solutions for managing digital assets, both across the digital and the physical space.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Keir, how can the guys find out more about what you're up to?
Right, well, you can see my name here. You'll have to remove the space between the minus and the Bates, but it's a unique name. There's only one Keir Finlow-Bates on the planet. So if you go to LinkedIn and search for me, that'll take you to my LinkedIn profile, and that has links to my YouTube channel with all my videos and my personal website and my company website. So that's the go-to place for me.
Brilliant.
I don't have an NFT name, such a shame.
I'll mint one tomorrow.
Thank you so much to Keir. Thank you to Sebastian. And from my side, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can check out the Blockchain Won't Save the World podcast. Also, YouTube channel called Blockchain Won't Save the World. We put a bunch of interesting stuff up there, videos, group chats, podcasts relating to how blockchain is being used in the real world today. So anybody wants to go and check that out, please feel free to do so. Connect with any of the guys here. They're doing some amazing work. Everything Sebastian produces is in monochrome though. So that's one limitation of following him on a regular basis. But thank you very much to my friends for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the content. Thanks to the audience for the brilliant questions, and have an awesome rest of your day.